Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Jeff Wasielewski. I'm the commercial tropical fruit extension agent for Miami-Dade County. And we're going to talk today at this Tropical Fruit Tuesday about growing fruit trees in containers. So you will be on mute during the webinar and you can ask questions in the chat. I've already got a few in there that I answered and one that I'm going to answer soon. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for being here. So University of Florida does have an extension office in all 67 counties, including Miami-Dade. So that's us down there. I'm in Homestead because that's where all the agriculture is. And we have extension agents here on tropical fruit like me. We have one on vegetables. We have one for nurseries. We have one for homeowners. So we do a lot of extension and outreach and give out a lot of information. There's also about 11 or 12 research centers in the state that are University of Florida. And we're lucky to have the Tropical Research Education Center, TREC, right down here, right next to us. And there they have a tropical fruit entomologist, a tropical fruit specialist. They have a plant pathologist. They're going to have a tropical fruit plant breeder. So you have all this information over there and they're doing research, and then I gather that information and I extend it. So that's extension. So Erna asks, will I be talking about mangoes? Yes. So today is growing fruit trees in containers. I do this webinar once a month. So in 2 weeks, we'll do air layering fruit trees. And then April 18th, my daughter's 22nd birthday, we'll do fertilizing fruit trees. So these are all the Tropical Fruit Tuesdays that have already been done and are on YouTube. So you see there's quite a few. There's 21. Today makes the 22nd, and that will be on YouTube by the end of the week. So if you go to YouTube and you search Tropical Fruit Tuesday, you'll get a list of all of these. See, we have pruning, planting, fertilizer, post-production, grafting, air layering, seeds, cuttings, growing mangoes, avocados, and the list goes on and on. So feel free to check those out. If you can't sleep at night, they're 40 minutes, so they'll definitely put you right down. So that'll be a nice little bedtime story. So where do you get information? I always like to start with this. So there's a database called Ask IFAS that you can search, Ask IFAS, and it has this huge database. If you go to the bar there and type in mango, you'll get a few publications on mango. One of them will be Growing Mango in the Home Landscape, which will be about 15 pages and tells you everything: planting, pruning, fertilizing, cultivars, tells you a ton of information. And you can't get it into this University of Florida database unless it's peer reviewed. So that means a lot of people have to look at it before you post it. So that's important. John asked, is there a link to the YouTube channel? I don't have one here, but if you just go to YouTube and search Tropical Fruit Tuesdays, you'll find it, because it's actually on the Miami-Dade IFAS extension channel, but it's got its own little section there, and no one's stolen that name yet, so it'll come right up. So another good place to get information is other universities. So if you type in like breadfruit space edu, you'll get good information from University of Hawaii on breadfruit, because we don't have a lot of good information on that in University of Florida. Like I said, YouTube, Tropical Fruit Tuesdays are there, but also a lot of good information that's visual, so you can actually see what they're teaching you. So you might click on a video, it might not be the best, but if you click on 3 or 4 on that same subject, you're going to get the idea and you're going to master it pretty well. Another good place to get information are master gardeners. I know we have some of them listening today. One of my favorites, Pat Gill. And there they take courses, they do volunteer work. They're very knowledgeable. You can become one as well. Another great place to get information are plant clubs or societies. So you can join a club. There's a couple rare fruit ones. There's a native plant one. There's, I think, a rose one. There's an orchid one. They meet about once a month, and speakers and other people in the group are very knowledgeable. Social media, obviously a great place to get information. And your own garden or grove. This is the number one place that I want you to learn from. I try to walk the tropical fruit grove here at work once a day in the morning when I get in with my coffee to see what's going on. Right now, I see a lot of mango bloom, a lot of avocado bloom. I see some of the mango cultivars are setting pretty well, and some of them are not. So this is something I'm learning as I do my tour, my scouting. And then finally, beware the source of your information. Just because it comes up first on your search doesn't mean it's correct. So today we're going to talk about container growing. So container growing, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It can be very difficult. So I'm going to give you what I know about container growing, and so you have the best chance of doing it if you really want to do it. Container size. We need to think about container size, and I'll talk about that when we get to the repotting section. Soil and media, what you put in the container is very important because that's where your roots are going to be. Fertilizer, this is important to use the right type of fertilizer and the right species and cultivar or variety of fruit tree. You can't just put in any fruit tree in a container and expect it to work. Someone mentioned mangoes. There's different cultivars of mangoes, obviously, and some of them stay a little smaller. If you get something like Kit or Valencia Pride, they want to grow pretty vigorously, a Hayden, so they're not going to be a good candidate for a container. And I'll talk about a few good candidates of mangoes in a few slides from now. And then something very important is the watering, because the way you water these things in containers is going to tell you if you're going to make it or not. Because if you overwater or underwater, that's a huge problem. Not as much of a problem if you have it in the ground, but a big problem in a container, because you can dry out really quick, or you can saturate your soil and kill those roots. So like I said, it is difficult. Watering is one of the things that makes it difficult because you have to have it just right. You obviously have a confined root space, so this makes it more difficult. I'm going to say, if you have the chance to plant something in a container versus putting it in the ground, I would put it in the ground because it's so much easier. If you have the space to put it in the ground where you're getting full sun, I would do that. If you're in a situation where you have to grow things in containers, or you're going to move and you want to keep things in containers until then, we'll talk about how you can do that. Like your balcony and your patio, some people want to grow on the balcony. Remember, you do need a lot of sun for your tropical fruit. So if you're on a balcony that's not getting a good amount of full sun, it's going to be very difficult. Also in containers, when you keep things in containers, you're going to bind up the roots. And this will be a problem only if you're going to take it from the container and put it into the ground eventually. But if you're going to keep it in a container, the root binding is not as big of a problem, because you don't want that root binding. So you have really strong roots, so it's not going to blow over in a storm if you put it in the ground. But in a container, it's not that much of a problem, and it can actually, I think, help a little bit to keep the tree a little smaller. And then pruning, you're going to have to prune these trees, and it's not like pruning in the ground. You're going to have to be really careful how you prune. Remember, guys, you can ask questions in the chat, and you're on mute during the webinar, and this is being recorded and will be on YouTube by the end of the week. So I took a lot of these pictures recently at the Fruit and Spice Park. If you haven't been to the Fruit and Spice Park, definitely check it out. They have hundreds and hundreds of species of tropical fruit and spices. This is to the right. In the front of the park, they have a few fruit trees that they're growing in these very large wooden containers. So this is a sapodilla to the right. And the cultivar is macaque, M-A-K-O-K. On the left, the same day, picture taken the same day, is another sapodilla, also same cultivar, macaque, and you see it's got a fair amount of a crop there. It's got a pretty good crop. So being in the ground, it allowed it to do a little better. But again, if you can only grow in a container, it's better to get 10 fruit than no fruit. Thank you, Jeannie. She put in the link to the Tropical Fruit Tuesdays into the chat. Thanks so much. So benefits, we talked about it being difficult, but what are some of the good reasons you would grow in a container? And I have one more to add here. You can obviously grow in a smaller space. You can really control the watering, which we'll see later with breadfruit became an issue at the Fruit and Spice Park. You can control the soil pH. Remember, South Florida, the pH is very high. We have a limestone rock bed, oolitic limestone. pH is 7.8 to 8.8, around there. So that makes it harder to grow some of these things. Someone earlier mentioned growing blueberries and should they keep them in a container. Blueberries, if you're in South Florida, they need more cold than we're going to get, but they also like the pH acidic. So I would definitely keep them in containers and hope we get enough cold. And I would water them. I would collect rainwater and water with the rainwaters for that acidity. And I would do that with the blueberries. So yes, I would keep them in a container. Then also the soil, you're going to be able to add a lot more organic matter than you're going to get. Eric asked, what about miracle fruit? Miracle fruit, I would treat it just like the blueberries. Put it in soil that has acidic soil, so it's going to have a lot of peat. And I would collect rainwater and water that with rainwater if you can. Get yourself a big rainwater barrel. So all kinds of questions popping out. Dragon fruit, I think you can do it in container, but obviously you need a trellis. So some growers do them in containers to kind of help with the diseases. And Ileana asked about key lime tree. I would do my citrus in containers because they might do a little better with citrus greening. And key lime is one that does better with citrus greening than some of the others. But citrus greening, we'll see in a few pictures from now, is really devastating. Bruce says miracles seem to do better in pots. I agree. So here's a June plum in a container. It's got a good amount of fruit on it. They also have some tomatoes mixed in there, which probably not the best idea. So here's some containers they have. They use these for vegetables. This is at the Fruit and Spice Park. You could get away with some big fruit trees in here, but this is, very large container, not something that you're going to do at home. And really, if you had the space, you just put it in the ground. So containers are great for vegetables because vegetables need a very small amount of root space for their roots. And they do like the better soil. They don't like our soil. So you always want to grow vegetables in a raised bed like these here or in containers. Lettuce is something you can grow in a very small container and it will do very well. They grow very easy. So just to look at one of the containers, here's something you can do. Obviously not a tropical fruit, but interesting, very pretty. So here we have a very good grower. And he's got a few things in containers. He's got lemongrass over here. He's got succulents, which obviously would do better in containers than in the ground, because then you can really control the water. They don't like a lot of water. Here he's got a miracle fruit. And then here he's got a jaboticaba. And jaboticaba, I think, is one of the ones that you might want to grow in a container. I've had more success with them in containers than in the ground. Again, the acidity is part of that. So here on the right is the lemongrass and the succulents. And on the left, you see the jaboticaba putting out fruit. It's not a really huge tree. It can do well in a container, I think. And it doesn't spread a lot. It kind of goes up. So I think that's a good one. And again, it likes that acidic soil, which we can control. And it likes, I would again try to water with rainwater if you can. So here's the miracle fruit that he has. See, the soil is got a lot of perlite, that white stuff. So it's going to drain very well. And the dark there is probably peat, which is giving it the acidity. The perlite doesn't change the pH. There you see it's got a good amount of fruit on there. It's got pretty good color. You might want to give it a little shot of iron, but I think all in all, that's a good looking plant. So on the left, again, at the Fruit and Spice Park, you have the lang lang tree, more of an ornamental flowering tree, but they have it in a container and they get it to flower. So that's a bigger tree and they're keeping it smaller. On the right, you have a pretty large miracle fruit and it's doing pretty well. The location that it's at, people are just going to constantly pick the fruit. So you're not going to see a lot on there. Anu has a good question that I don't think I was going to answer, but it's a really good question. She said, or Anu joined late and said, are the containers open to the ground or closed bottoms? That's a good question. So they're going to be closed, but they're going to have holes for drainage. So you always want to have holes for drainage, but you don't want them just straight open. So they're going straight into the ground. That's kind of cheating. So you want to keep them closed with holes, because you don't want that water pooling at the bottom of your container, because then you're going to kill that bottom layer of roots. So you do want it to drain. You're going to water it until it drains out the bottom. That's when you know it's water the whole container once it comes out the bottom. Therese asked, what's the biggest container for these trees you would recommend? I would say you can go as big as you can. We're going to see a really huge one in a minute, but as big as you can. But the trick is that you don't want to start with a little 3-gallon container, which is what you would typically buy a fruit tree at, and then put that in the big container right away. You don't want to jump from the little one to the final product. You want to step it up slowly. And I'll show you that when I repot the jaboticaba in a few minutes here. So yes, you can go very large. And these containers on the left, this June plum with the fruit here, they're big. They're probably 50-gallon. And I think they were made by Boy Scouts. But you wouldn't go with a little plant and put it in here right away, because all that soil is just going to hold water and you're going to mess up the roots. So you want the roots to kind of fill the pot. And then when they really fill the pot, then you step it up to a bigger size. So here's the one I was talking about, the breadfruit, this huge container that the Boy Scouts built. You see, I put a coconut there for size. So this was a breadfruit and they had it outside in the ground and they felt like it was getting too much water and it wasn't blooming and it wasn't fruiting. So they took it out. Chris Rollins took it out and put in these big containers so it would get better drainage, because he figured that's how they do it in the the keys, it's very good drainage there on the limestone and the coral. So he did that, and he did get them the fruit. So, but again, this is a huge container, so this would be something I don't think you would do in your own home, but just showing you that it's done. Anu asks, how do you know when it's time to go to the next size pot? You know when the tree starts kind of wilting pretty quick, like you water it, and then 2 days later, it's already starting to wilt. That tells me that the roots are really filling that container, and there's not much soil there to soak up the water. You can also see the roots coming out of the bottom of the container, and you can just kind of judge by the size of the tree if it's ready to go up. And I'll show you that. So here's a few they had in containers: variegated bay rum on the right, lemon allspice on the left. I asked them why they put these in containers, and they just said they wanted like a little spice garden. So these are not huge trees if you keep them in containers, so they're keeping them pretty well managed. But again, they have the space in the ground right there. They could have just put it in the ground. What would have happened in that case is it would probably be bigger. Armando, who is a true tropical fruit expert, so any question he asks, I'm not going to know the answer because he's really great. But he asked about anonas in containers. And Armando, I think I have a list coming up. I think like sugar apple, you can get away with it. Atamoya might be too big. So I'm going to kind of draw the line there. But again, with these bigger containers, I think you can do it. And, sugar apples, they kind of grow up and not too wide. So I think that's a good candidate for a container. So here they have another breadfruit in a smaller pot. And there you have one of the really big ones that has fruited and flowered. And you might notice it's also inside of a shade house here. And that's to protect it from the cold. Anu asked, do you recommend worms or castings in containers? Yes, any kind of compost that you can get in there is fine. And worms, castings are good too. So here we have irrigation, different techniques. You can hand water your containers. If you have a lot of containers, though, that's going to be a lot of work, because remember, the pots don't hold a ton of water. So you're going to have to water more often than you would in the ground, for sure. So these little micro jets would be maybe a way to go, that it wouldn't be so difficult to hand water all the time. So here is passion fruit. They have them in containers. This might help with some diseases and definitely with nematodes, because nematodes are in the soil and they can attack your plants. But you see they have them in containers, but they also need these big trellises to grow on. So, you're saving space a little bit with the container, but they're going to go wide. And same with dragon fruit. Here, see the dragon fruit in the containers, but then they're going up and they need all this space to grow and properly flower and fruit. Another good thing about containers is you're not going to get all this weed whacker damage that I see a lot with fruit trees that are in the ground. So here are a bunch of citrus trees that they put in containers. They had a collection. They put them all in. This is Fruit and Spice Park again. And they all got citrus greening. Citrus greening is a really bad disease, and it makes it almost impossible to grow citrus without having trouble. But and what citrus greening does is it destroys the roots, so the tree can no longer take up water and nutrients. So having it in a container might help. And Eliana, you asked about key lime. So that it would probably help to keep it in a container, because you can more closely control the water and the nutrients to the roots. But here you see a tree on the left, and here you see the splotching, this yellow splotching, that's the citrus greening spread by a little tiny leaf hopper. Bruce asks about glyphosate and greening. I don't know any connection there. Eliana says, how about if the leaves are losing color? It may be citrus greening if they're getting yellow and they're splotchy. If they're yellow, if the veins are green and the whole thing is yellow, then it's probably iron. Rebecca asks, I'm showing a lot of wooden containers. What type of wood would you suggest? I'm showing wood containers because that's what they have at the Fruit and Spice Park. And it looks like they might have pressure treated wood in there. But I don't recommend that because that's got chemicals in it and you don't want that in the roots. So I would go if you had like a cedar or a redwood, something like that. That would be good for the wooden containers. But you can certainly do plastic, no problem. You can do clay. The one I have at home is clay. The one at that other house I showed you were clay. Erna asks, with citrus greening, once the trees have it, do we give up on them? You can kind of milk them along. You can give them a little slow water and slow nutrients and milk them along. You might get some fruit out of them, so I wouldn't completely give up. So pruning, not enough time to really go into this, but you want to kind of prune the top to fit the bottom. So you don't really heavily prune it because that will kick it into vegetative growth. But you do want to do some snipping to make it branch, and you do want to do some snipping to keep it from getting, huge. John asks, what about oak leaves and oak leaf tea for greening? I don't know that that's going to work, but certainly oak leaves and oak leaf tea are going to be something that I think is good because, that's acidic, it's compost, it's natural, it's organic. So I would like that for your fruit trees. So species and cultivars, we talked about mango. So some of the ones that might do better in a container are Rosy Gold, Malacca, Fairchild, Angie, Neelam, and I forgot Coggshall. That will do pretty well as well. So I would add Coggshall to that list. Sapodilla, I would go with the macaque. That's a real dwarfy one. That's it in the picture to the left. Armando, there's sugar apple, which I mentioned. John says Pickering would be another good one for the mango. Yeah, there's thousands of cultivars of mango, so obviously I'm not hitting them all. June plum, that's one that we saw earlier. Carambola, I think, would do okay. It's a smaller tree. It fruits very easily. Canistel, you might be able to get away with it. Citrus, guava, again, not a huge tree. It fruits very easily. And then Jaboticaba. So these are just some of the species that I would say would work. There's obviously more. And some of the cultivars, but there's obviously more. Ones I would stay away from, the big mangoes like Kid, Valencia Pride, Kent, Hayden, Edward. I think lychee would be a little too big. Longan, Meme, Adamoya is bigger. You might be able to sneak it in. And then avocado, I think. There may be some smaller avocados that you could get it to work. So just, this is showing you in DC. This is the United States Botanical Garden. And then they had a mango in the ground, but really it was more of a container because it was inside a greenhouse. And they had an avocado as well. You see, it's a very confined area. So this is sort of container growing. So this is working pretty well as far as the tree looking good. But again, it's indoors and it's not getting the proper temperature to bloom properly. And then also the pollinators aren't going to be there. So here's something I saw at the Deering Estate that had this big container, which would probably be pretty good for putting in one or two fruit trees. And it looks like redwood there, looks like very good, nice, wood. But what I did notice is the soil. The soil is very compacted, and you don't see any perlite, you don't see anything that's going to make drainage. So this would, I guarantee if you took a shovel and you hit that, it would bounce right off. So I would say that this is destined for failure if they try to plant something there. If they really wanted to, they would need to really mix in some good soil with that other soil. So really something like a lot of perlite, a lot of peat, some pine bark. So repotting, we're going to go through the steps. So there's my Java Tacaba on the left, and you see it's wilted. So it's really filled up that container. And just because it wilts doesn't mean it's ready to go into a bigger pot if you haven't watered for a long time. But if you water and then pretty soon after it wilts, then you might guess that it needs to go into a bigger pot. So there's my bigger pot. And with repotting, we need to think about the media, the soil, container size. Remember I said step it up slowly. Don't go from real small to real big. And leave a lip. If you look at that picture on the left, or the pot on the left, there's about a 3-inch lip at the top. So you're going to need that so the water can fill up and then drain. Erna asked you, she said she was told she should repot 2 sizes up, but she has 7-gallon now. What's next up? I would just go something like 2/3 as big. So it might be a 15 or a 25. Stephen asked about the components of repotting media. We'll touch on that. And John asked, would you ever want to trim roots? Yeah, you might want to pull out and trim the roots to help keep it a little smaller. So fertilizer, we want to control the pH, and then the watering is very important. So here we go. We're going from this size to that size. It's about 2/3 bigger. Speaking of the roots, if you have these circling roots, you might want to cut them. You don't want them to bind up. When you're repotting, make sure you're at the right depth. So you're going to go down the trunk of the tree. You're going to pull away the soil. And when you see that flare root like that, that lets you know you're at the right level. So if you happen to buy a tree and it's planted too deep, you can fix that when you repot. So speaking of the soil, you're going to want to amend whatever soil you have with some perlite, some vermiculite, or some calcined clay. These are all things that don't change the pH, but give you really good drainage and aeration. So that's important. So there you see on the left, this Turf Face Athletics, that's the calcined clay. I haven't used that, but I've heard it's very good. I use perlite. Vermiculite is very much like perlite. So these are some of the things you're going to want in your soil, your media. And then peat moss. Peat moss is going to hold water. It's going to be acidic, and it's natural. It's organic. So in the sense of just natural, not officially organic. So you could also have pine bark and chips, like very small pine bark. Sand will give you some weight so your trees don't blow over. I don't love having sand. And then also coffee grounds. I do use coffee grounds. So there's my coffee. I'll mix that right in with the soil when I'm mixing extra perlite into my soil. Or you can put that around your trees as well. So here's the soil. I keep it in a garbage can, which is very handy. And the soil you see, the white is perlite, the dark is peat. So this is really a good combination, but for me, and you see it again on the right, for me, it's really it's going to hold too much water. John asked about ratios. I'm not real good with ratios. Here I would say the The ratio of P to perlite is like a maybe 5-to-1, and I'd like it to be more like a 5-to-2. Bruce, yes. So here's the perlite. So I'm going to take some of that and mix it in because I like it a little lighter, meaning it drains better. So here's my regular soil at the top. You can buy that. What I wouldn't buy is something that has insecticides in it because they do sell soil like that. And I wouldn't buy something that's just black soil because that's really muck. It's not going to be good. So I'm mixing that in. Steven says it looks like Pro Mix. He is correct. There's Pro Mix. There's also Jungle Mix. There's a lot of ones that are kind of pre-mixed. But again, I add a little more perlite. So that's what it's going to look like when I'm done. And the coffee's in there. And it's got more perlite. So that's going to drain really well. So here I take it out of the container. And you see it was definitely ready to come out because it's very solid. And the bottom you can see is not really wet. It's very dry because it's got a lot of roots there. So what I'm going to do is take this plant and I'm going to kind of tickle the sides to break up the roots a little bit. Then I'm going to put soil about 1/3 of the way up in this bigger container. I'm going to drop that in so it's at the right level. I'm going to leave a little lip. So here we're going from there to there. So there it is. You see I broke up the sides a little bit. We're leaving the lip. We have some soil on the bottom. Now I'm going to backfill more soil. And then when I get to about 1/3 from the top, then I'm going to put in my slow release fertilizer. And very important, you don't put normal fertilizer. You need to have slow release, like very slow release, like coated. So there's the fertilizer. You're looking for this, these little gray coats or these little yellow coats. There's like NutriCoat, Osmocoat, Dynamite. There's all these different ones. They're going to cost more, but they're not going to burn your roots. And then I backfill to the top. Then I have just about 2 inches of a lip. Remember, the lip is important because when you water, the water goes up to the lip and then it goes down. If you just have the soil all the way to the top of the pot, you're not going to get that little chance to get it to drain. Benoit says, do you put broken clay pot or rock at the bottom for drainage? I think you could. I don't, but I don't see a problem with doing that. So that might be, I see no problem with doing that. So you could do that. I don't know that I would use like limestone rock, but you could use river rock. Private message, what would the alternative to chemical fertilizers be? Well, like the coffee that I put in there, any kind of organic matter, compost, things like that. So container growing, to sum up, can be difficult. Keep your container size in mind. Keep your soil in mind. Your fertilizer needs to be slow release. Think about your species and your cultivars. And then the watering, super important. Watering is super important. Benefits, you have a smaller space. You can really control the watering. You can control the pH. So you can grow things like Jaboticaba, Miracle Fruit a little easier. And you have more organic matter. So thank you for coming to Tropical Fruit Tuesdays. Our next one is March 14th on air layering, then April 18th on fertilizing. And if you could, guys, do me a big favor and just scan this. You can open your phone, open your camera and scan this and take a quick 2 to 3 minute survey, or I put the link in the chat. You can click on it there if you're old school. This is a very quick survey. It will really help me out. And Ruth asks, is mulching needed or recommended in containers? I think a little layer of mulch will help to keep the weeds down. So can't go wrong with a little mulch. So if you guys could scan that or click on the link in the chat, that would be great. And answer that question or the few questions that I have there, very few. And I really want to thank you guys for coming. And I hope to see you next month. And remember, this will be up on YouTube by the end of the week. Ern asks, is it always best to use rainwater for container trees? Only the ones that really like it acidic. So like blueberries, miracle fruit, and jaboticaba. You don't have to though. Okay, guys, I'm going to put that link in there one more time so you can click on that. And I see a lot of people saying thank you, so you're definitely welcome. And thanks for coming.